Hi, Stefan.
Hi, Nader.
How are you?
I'm fine.
Nice
What about
to see you today. I'm fine, thanks. So in this sequence, we're going to talk about what is to be the therapist of a patient suffering from ADHD or taking care of families of a patient having ADHD. You are a therapist of children and adolescents, so we'll probably start with your experience. So what it is to be the therapist of...
Okay, so I frequently see families. Often they come, they suspect that their children or the teenagers suspect that he might have ADHD, but often the diagnosis also comes as a surprise. They have problem and they didn't think about it. My first task will be to really document things, document symptoms, be sure that this is ADHD, because ADHD is a rather persisting diagnosis. So my goal will also be to quantify the symptoms for many reasons so that I can follow the evolution of the symptoms with the treatment. But also, in many countries, you really need to document things for the insurance so that you're sure the things are covered. You also want to leave no room for doubts about diagnosis. So at the end, I think it's very important for me to be a professional. My professionalism, my reliability, my knowledge about ADHD will be absolutely key to establish an alliance. Indeed, right? Patients today, or families, or people, you tell them something, they go on the internet, they want to check and be sure that this corresponds.
So they check what you say and they check about ADHD. So you need this professionalism, but also this therapeutic alliance. And I must say that in adults is really the same, because I will need to be sure that I'm facing someone with ADHD and not something else. So I will need to spend time to document the symptoms. And sometimes it's also difficult to know how the patient was as a child. So I often need other sources of information, like school records, or ask the parents if they're still alive.
Home videos.
And so on. So, but I need to spend several interviews with the patient just to be sure that I'm doing my job as a specialist of ADHD. And this is also very important because for adults, some come without a diagnosis of ADHD, most of them, I must say, as adults. So they've never been diagnosed before. And when they learn they have ADHD, it might be sometimes difficult for them to know that there is a disorder for which there was a possible treatment before. And they have never been treated or diagnosed. And this might be sometimes difficult for them.
So then the next step for me is really to make sure that my observations are understood and shared. Another thing, especially with a family, is that you have to restore and get a consensus of the vision around the problems. For example, if a mother sees the problem and thinks that there should be absolutely a treatment, and the father doesn't see the problem and thinks that's just fine, then the child will be really taken in a conflict of interest, not knowing what to do. And in a way, taking the treatment or not is like choosing between mom and dad, and that's really a bad position to take a treatment on the long term. Another important thing is that you should never presuppose the expectation and the concern of the people. Indeed, for example, for you see the ADHD problem, and then for the patient or the family, it might be anxiety that is on the forefront, or loss of confidence, which is a consequence, of course. So you have to really listen to your patient to be sure that you will address what they expect.
So, yes, so what you're saying, be with the patient with ADHD, it just takes time to be sure that it is ADHD. But also for me as adults, it's very important to exclude comorbidities and differential diagnoses. It is also important to have a consensus, as you said, about what is ADHD and what is not, because there are a lot of myths and beliefs around the disorder, but also around the treatment. And as soon as we have a diagnosis, some patients, they just want to rely only on the medication, and other do not want at all medication. So I need to spend time to discuss what is ADHD and what are the advantages to take a medication or not, and what are the advantages to learn skills to cope with ADHD. As you said, for children and adolescents, it's a long process sometimes, and it might be sometimes difficult also for ADHD patients to wait for the treatment and to wait or to have several appointments to come out with a diagnosis and a treatment plan.
And so with children and teenagers, one other thing that is typical when you follow them over time, it's the fluctuation of the symptoms, right? As they age, we have seen that hyperactivity, impulsivity tends to decrease as attention problems tend to persist. And when it persists also in adolescence, in young adulthood, then you raise the question of the identity. And this is very often something that comes during the follow-up. You know, who I am. I am a person, an ADHD person, a person with ADHD, and being able to, as a therapist, accept the doubts and the refusal of the treatment at times. The fact that the patient wants to do trials, experiment, to see what and find what is right for him is very important, to stay with the patient whatever happens for him.
So the question of identity is probably less striking in adults than in adolescents or children. We have some question about how I would be with medication and without medication, so I need to discuss that with the patient. What I also need to discuss more in details is the treatment plan. So do I need to see the patient every month, every year? I need to be careful also not to lose patients, because some of them, they suddenly stop the treatment because it works and they believe that the ADHD has disappeared, and they come 4 years later with many difficulties and a surprise that ADHD is still here. So I need to follow the patients, and I need to make them aware that, I mean, if there is any difficulty, they should come really fast. They need to plan ahead any difficulties, because this is partly due to the ADHD. They do not plan in advance the difficulties they may face.
And so you raised this point that I think I want to also talk about, which is withdrawing from treatment. And I think that this may be really necessary at some point in the process to understand, at least for a teenager, who you are with and without the medication or the treatment. And most of the teenagers, they go through a period where they need to withdraw from treatment, that to understand, to learn that treatment is in fact part of their decision, that it does not, treatment does not limit their freedom or their strength.
Yeah. And I have the same discussion with adult patients. So this is partly what I said before about the treatment plan. So it's really a personalized approach, and every patient will have his or her own treatment and own treatment plan. But I must say that in general, it's really a pleasure to work with these patients. I mean, they are really motivated to change. Most of them want to understand what is ADHD, and not only patients, but also families. So I want just to thank these patients, because I mean, I really like to work with them. And it's not like for other disorders. I mean, there is something specific about ADHD, which makes me I feel really pleased to work with them.
Well, I often think that as a therapist, I'm extremely lucky, right? Because I do something that I deeply love. I have a passion like you. This is why we did this MOOC together, right? And I think we're very fortunate to do this with such a passion. And we also do it because we're lucky to have patients that are also, I think we develop very strong relationship with them.
I agree with you. So thank you, Stéphane.
Thank you, Nadia.